special next guest is someone whose personal enormous contribution of the development and recognition of no-code is undeniable. Thousands and thousands of people first heard and learned about no-code thanks to Tara Reid. Tara is the founder and CEO of Apps with No Code, and her TED Talk on the topic has actually showed literally hundreds of thousands of people about what you can actually do with no code. Where do you get started? What are the caveats? What are the pluses and the minuses? And Tara, since then, is living the talk that she delivered. She is the founder of, I personally know that Tara is running a ton of projects. Tara does a lot of education and runs her own no-code startup. Tara is going to be sharing the experience and the wisdom of how do you get started and how did she get started, and it's going to be both inspirational and practical for all of us. Tara, welcome. It's amazing to have you here. It's great to talk to you as always.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
All right, Tara, we're going to be having a short Q&A session by the end of it. So I'm going to be collecting all the questions, which I'm sure there's going to be a ton of. Thank you, and please take it from here.
So I'm going to assume that the majority of you guys know a little bit about no code. That's why you're already here. So I won't go a ton into how this works because you already know a little bit. So I'm going to do a couple things today. I want to quickly introduce myself first, just so you have a little bit of context about my story, because it's helpful to understand that so that we can talk about making money and building profitable no-code apps, because it is not enough to just build something really cool, right? To build something that people want to use, but they only want to use for free. I want to talk to you today about what it looks like to have a thriving business with no-code. I'm just going to walk you through a couple things just to introduce myself really quickly. If we haven't met before, my name is Tara Reid and I'm a tech entrepreneur. So before becoming an entrepreneur, I used to lead marketing initiatives at Google, Foursquare, and Microsoft. So I was always in tech. My career was in tech, but I was not a developer myself. I knew people who were developers, but I was mainly working in marketing and business before I discovered no code. And in 2014, I founded a really successful art startup. And so what happened was I had this idea for an app that would help people find artwork for their homes. But at the time, I didn't know how to code. I didn't have $20,000 to hire someone to build the app for me. And I also wasn't really sure that even the people that I knew how to code in my network, like I wasn't fully sure that I was going to be able to articulate to them exactly what I needed in code speak so that we were going to be able to like be efficient with our time. So I wanted to take a stab at doing this myself, right? I just wanted to see how far can I take this building it myself. And if it doesn't work, then I'll figure out some other way. That was really how I first approached no code. Now, mind you, this is in 2014, before a lot of the really cool tools that I use now were around. So what I did actually with this first app that I built, which is called Collecto, and what it was an algorithm that matched people to artwork based on their taste. Now, to build the first version of that product, I really went down to, okay, what do I already have at my disposal? What do I know how to use right now? Because remember, this is before a lot of the great tools that existed now were out. And actually for me, having the constraint was a benefit. So what I did was I actually took a survey tool. And you know how survey tools have show hide logic? You ever taken a survey before and it's like, what's your favorite color? And it gives you multiple choice and you choose purple. And then it asks you a follow-up question and it's like, great, why do you love purple? Have you ever seen something like that in a survey? So what it's doing is for the follow-up question, it is showing the blue follow-up question, but I'm sorry, hiding the blue follow-up question, but showing the purple follow-up question. So it's showing and hiding different follow-up questions based on how you answered above or what you've already entered about yourself. So I took that technology and I built the first version of my product, which was an app that had people, or it was a survey really that I was using for my customers. So I wasn't thinking about like, how do I get the perfect login screen? How do I get it perfectly in the app store? That was not the objective. My objective was, how do I get to my customers who have signed up How do I get to them what they need? Which is all they care about. They don't care about how cute the app looks. They don't care about what the login screen looks like. They just want art recommendations for their house. That's all they care about. So I used this survey, and the way that I set it up was that if you said that you liked photography, it would show all the photography and hide everything else. Or if you said that you liked photography that was black and white and had a budget of $1,000 and below, it would show all the things that matched that and hide everything else. So we used web scraping to pull artwork from all over the internet and put it into our system. And then based on what people liked, it would show and hide artwork based on their taste. And people would email me and say, oh my gosh, Tara, I love your app so much. And really at the first version of it, all it was a survey tool. I spent $35 a month on Survey Gizmo. I think it was like $35 or $39 a month for my Survey Gizmo subscription. And with that first version of the app, I made my first $35,000. $35,000 of revenue with that survey that I had hacked together. And I thought, oh, wait a minute, I think this could be a business. So that was my start in no code, pre a lot of the tools that were out here. I then went on with that same app that I had generated $35,000 for. It was really just a survey at the time. I then went on to raise money with it. We went to 500 startups, which we got a $100,000 investment from. And I remember the interview at 500 startups where we were talking about the business and how much revenue had been generated. I remember my interview for this accelerator program. And then we got to the part where they were asking about how you built the product. Do you have a CTO? What have you done thus far? And mind you, later on in my journey, I switched over to building the product with Bubble. But at this point, I had just had that survey that I had hacked together, but I was making money from it. And so we were in the interview and we're talking about how the technology had been built. And I was like, okay, let me just explain. And I explained that I had used a survey. What we were doing is we were using show hide logic for it. And we're really open to how we can grow the product, but that was our MVP. And then I quickly pivoted to, and here's how much money we've made from it, right? And I remember the partners that were in the meeting looking at each other, and they all looked at each other around that time and nodded their heads. Because what was really clear was that this person was going to figure out how to launch this thing no matter what. They were going to be scrappy and they were going to figure it out, and they were generating revenue with their product, even if the product wasn't perfect. That was like one of the biggest learnings that I got in my early no-code days about what is possible with this. To me, and this is what we're going to talk about today, the cool part about no code is that you can use it to generate revenue quickly. And I think that one of the biggest mistakes I see people make with no code is that now that they're able to build a product, they want to tinker and change the button over here and move the button over here. No one cares about where the button is. Your customers just want their problem solved. So just to fast forward a little bit, I've been featured in some awesome publications. Entrepreneur magazines featured me in their Young Millionaires edition. Forbes has done some really fun articles on how to succeed in Silicon Valley when you don't look like Mark Zuckerberg. And I've also done that TED Talk that was mentioned earlier that has a lot of views now on how to build apps without code. So what I want to do now is I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen, and I want to just talk to you about one way that you can rethink making money with your no-code app, right? Because one of my favorite ways, and by the way, I have a training program that I do where I coach people on how to generate revenue with their no-code ideas. One of my favorite strategies for generating revenue with your no-code app is called white labeling. Let me know in the chat, are you guys familiar with the concept of white labeling? Do you know what I mean when I say that? Just in case you're not sure exactly how white labeling works, here's what you do to consider a white labeling model for your business. And this is something that gets you revenue very early on. What you do is you ask yourself, what kind of companies or organizations would want to have their own version of this app? What kind of companies or organizations would want to have their own version of this app? And what you do is you take the app that you created and you take your logo off of the app, and you put the company or the client or the organization, it could be a nonprofit, you put their logo onto the app. That's called white labeling. So what you're doing is you're saying, hey, you get to take credit for this product. And you can do this white labeling partnership with an unlimited number of people, right? So you can have 100 clients that you do white labeling deals for. It doesn't mean that you can only do one for. So you take your logo off, you put their logo on, you just like make a copy of your app, put their logo on it. And what you say is, hey, I will allow you to take credit for this. Say, hey, here's our cool app, as long as you pay us the big bucks. So usually when you white label your product, your pricing starts at $3,000 a year and up per client. I have a lot of students that I work with who are charging $10,000 a year, $20,000 a year and up, depending on who the customer is. So let me walk you through some examples of how this white labeling thing works, just so that you can maybe wrap your mind around it and consider it as one of the ways that you can make money with your own no-code idea. So I have an entrepreneur who's gone through our program. His name is Josh, and Josh is a music teacher. So what Josh does is he goes to, or what he used to do, is he goes to schools, middle schools, elementary schools, high schools, and he teaches their music programs after school, right? But he can only be in so many places at once. So his original plan was to build an app for parents, for students and parents, to teach them music digitally, electronically. And what you can do is you can like compose the song and different components of the song together, and you can have little assignments to do, and you would learn how to write and compose music in his app. His original plan was to go directly after parents and families and kids and maybe charge like $5 a month as a subscription. But we first, before he did that, talked about the option of white labeling. And the question I asked him was the same question I mentioned before. What kinds of companies or organizations would like to have their own version of the app? And he thought about it, and he was like, well, the schools would. The schools would like to have their own version of the app because they could use this in their classrooms. And so that's exactly what he did. Instead of going after individual people like students and parents, where he would charge $5 a month, he then went on to go after schools. He took his logo off, put the school's logo on, and he charges $5,000 and up for his product per year for the school to have access to it. And he has about 32 schools in the state of Virginia who white label this app for him. Really lucrative for him, right? I'll give you another example. Let's say that you had an idea for an app and you really wanted to help the world. So you wanted to create an app to help homeless folks and the homeless population, right? It's gonna be really hard for you to have a lucrative business if you're charging homeless folks just because they don't have that kind of money to spend on your app. So the question for us to ask ourselves is, what kind of companies or organizations would like to have their own version of this app, right? I have an entrepreneur who's done this, and she thought about it. And she said, okay, I think that nonprofits would, because there's all sorts of nonprofits who have humongous budgets set aside just to help homeless people and homeless populations. And they're sitting around figuring out, particularly in today's day and age, how can we do this digitally? How can we extend our reach with technology, right? And so they were able to go to these organizations and to white label their app, which had a listing of services for homeless populations, and be able to put that in front of organizations and nonprofits, took their logo off, put the nonprofit's logo on, and is now charging high price points for their product. Now, doing white labeling doesn't mean that you can't have a direct-to-consumer business model as well, but if you are bootstrapping, if you don't have a ton of investor money, it is a really good way to start getting money flowing in the door so you can start hiring people to help you, so that you can start developing more on your product, and so you can start generating revenue really early on. So white labeling is something that I just want you to consider it as one way for you to be generating money and real revenue with your business. I'm gonna pause here and see if there are any questions in the chat. There are all sorts of other ways you can be thinking about generating revenue with your business. But in general, my encouragement to you is to decide for yourself if it's important for you to make money with this app or not, right? Is it important for you to generate revenue with this app or not? You have to really decide that now. I see that a lot of no-coders, people who are building with no code, they're unsure. It's really fun to build the product, but generating revenue, they're like not quite sure how much of a priority it is. So I'm gonna pause for a second. Can you guys tell me in the chat, you can say generating revenue or build something cool. I'll simplify it into those two options. Tell me which of the two are you focused on? Are you focused on creating something that's going to generate revenue, or are you focused on creating something where you want to just build something cool that should exist in the world? I'll give you a second. Let me know in the chat what you're thinking. And then I'll walk you through what the next step will be once you figure that out. But you really do have to ask yourself that, because we have to figure out what we're optimizing for with your product, right? Are we optimizing for revenue, so we want to go after the revenue opportunities, or are we optimizing for something cool that should exist in the world, which may or may not mean that revenue is a priority? So I'm seeing lots of revenue all the way. Got it. Okay, so if you're optimizing for revenue, my last word of encouragement really for you is to, in addition to considering the white label model, right? I really want to make sure that what you take away from this talk is this. Stop going after customers who are not willing to pay you. If revenue is your focus, stop trying to go after the customers who are like, oh, I don't know, I'm not sure if this is worth it. For all of us, there is a niche version of our customer, a very specific, focused version of our customer who's willing to pay. Everybody out there has it, right? But if you go really broad in who your customer is, if you say my customer is all women, or it's all people in the US, or it's even if you go as broad as saying like musicians, right? That's way too broad for you to be targeting the exact customer type who is like itching to give you money. Your job is to narrow this down to the customer who is itching to make you money, to give you money. White labeling is one way to do that, because usually organizations, companies are usually have budget set aside for projects, whereas individuals often don't. But you can also charge individuals as well, right? But as long as you charge individuals, you want to be thinking, are they in the last week complaining about how they don't have a solution to this problem? And are they already spending money on something to solve that problem? You want to go after customers who are already spending money to solve their problem. They just don't know about your product yet. I see a question in the chat, which is, where do businesses look to find white labeled apps? So let me explain this a little bit, because you're not going to necessarily look to find white labeled apps. I'm not sure if the question is like, how do you find examples of white labeled apps? Is that the question? I'll answer it both ways just to make sure I fully understand it and I'm covering what you want to hear. So you often don't see white labeled apps as the sexiest apps that have the TechCrunch articles and that everybody's talking about. Why don't white label apps get all of the press? Well, because they're usually, when you go after businesses as your customer, you get less sexy press, but you're making way more money. That's usually the trade-off. If you make a decision that you're going to get focused in on revenue, you get less sexy press, but you get way more revenue and a more stable business. Now, you can go to all kinds of like websites, particularly ones that target like individual businesses, and they'll have white labeling options. If you look at their pricing, they often will have a tier that says, if you want a white label, here's what you do, right? There are even some no-code app softwares that do this. Mighty Networks, for example, is one that does this. So what you'll do for white labeling is you're not necessarily charging from the app store. What you do is you set up a meeting with some companies. And if I have a workshop, by the way, where I'll go into this in more detail. So if you guys want the link to my workshop where we go into this in more detail, I'll give you like the step-by-steps of how to do this. But what you can do is you can go on LinkedIn and you can ask yourself, what is the job description, the job title of a person who would make a decision on something like this, right? If you're going after schools, it might be principal. If you're going after entrepreneurs, it might be founder, right? If you're going after a CEO of a healthcare company, you might type in CEO healthcare, right? So what you're gonna do is you're going to go and search, and you'll find a bunch of people, and you can reach out to them and say, hey, here's the app that we build. Is this something that you'd be interested in? You'll find a lot of people who reply to you. I actually have a script if you'd like. I'll share with you guys. I'll give you a link to my workshop that's coming up next week where I'll give you the script that you can use. And so then you set up a phone call with them, right? The way that you make the money with a white labeled app is they pay up front. You send them an invoice. They pay up front, and now they've got access to it for the year. It is still your job to maintain it. If you think about like if you bought an apartment building and you were renting it out to people, it's still your job to make sure everything's okay. You're still the landlord, but they're renting it from you. And every year, or you could set it up every month, they're paying you to use it. And with white labeling, your pricing is usually high. As I mentioned, it starts at $3,000 and up. And the reason your pricing is usually high is because, well, what's their alternative? Their only alternative is to go hire a developer to build this for them. And that's going to start at like $10,000, $20,000. So your $3,000 is a great steal. That's why that white labeling structure works. They pay you up front for access for the year. You can just send them an invoice. And then you sort of maintain the app, make sure that it's still working and functioning. And if they have any problems, you help them. You're still the landlord of the app. Make sense? Okay, there's a question, how do you make a decision on the best app to sell? You talk to customers. Do not trust yourself to come up with like the best magical idea of the best app to sell. Come up with a person, a type of person who has a problem, and start talking to them. If you structure it so that you are asking them questions, tell me about the problem that you have. What are you using now to solve your problem? What do you like about what you're doing now to solve the problem? That leads you to the answer of what's the best app idea to sell. Do not try to come up with it with your own like magical entrepreneurship fairy dust. It's way too much work. I'm always a big advocate for being like a lazy entrepreneur. You can get to the answer way faster if you just talk to people, if you talk to your potential customer. Now, the problem is that that's the scary part. The scary part that nobody wants to do is talk to customers first. The scary part that no one wants to do is talk to customers about a product that's not fully finished yet. But that is the difference between the entrepreneurs who make money and the ones who don't. So you kind of have to like buck up and get the courage to talk to them first. They will give you the answers. And if you want and you don't know how to find them, go on LinkedIn, send some messages. That was how I launched my first company. I went on for my art startup. I went on LinkedIn. I typed in art collecting because, you know, you can put like your special interests on your LinkedIn profile. I looked for people who had art collecting in their special interests, and I sent messages to them. That was how I got my first customers. And I also started publicly talking about what I was doing. I was telling everybody that I could. I was posting on my Facebook, on my Instagram. I was not like, oh, let me keep it quiet and in beta until I figure it out. That's not how you get customers. They won't even know what you're working on. Cool. So if you guys are interested in like learning more about this, I can share a link to the workshop I have that's a little bit longer coming up next week. But I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about monetizing your no-code idea because this is important.
Tara, you are awesome. Monetizing is the name of the game, for sure. I mean, the topic of white labeling and making money early has resonated a lot with people. I mean, all those questions that we have, and we have a few more about white labeling. If you don't mind, let me go ahead and ask a couple.
Perfect.
So people were having a couple of strong opinions about revenue versus cool idea, and a lot of people said revenue, but a lot of people said both. So, and I guess the question that kind of complements that says which factors you should consider when deciding between like generating the revenue or building a cool application, which is a deep question actually, but what's your take on that?
Yeah, it really is a deep question. I think that like the answer I'm gonna give you, I don't know if it's gonna satisfy you, but it's your gut. Like this is sometimes we forget about our gut in entrepreneurship. Your gut, like you know if you're trying to build something to optimize for revenue or optimize for something cool. I would say that it takes a fair amount of self-awareness. I'll give you a quick example. When I launched my first app, I was not trying to optimize for revenue, actually. What I was trying to optimize for was I was really frustrated at the time with my job. And I was frustrated because there were all sorts of politics at my job. And I was like, I don't want to play these political games. I want to have a creative outlet to actually have control over the product. What I was optimizing for with my very first company was creative control, right? Later on, I was optimizing for revenue. So I think it's really about like sitting with yourself and like feeling into it, because that feeling in drives a lot of your entrepreneurship.
Amen to that. Self-consciousness and your own internal factors are what will take you there. Amazing. Obviously, Tara, you have a lot more to share than we have time for. So where can people find you? Where can people get more value out of your treasure trove of knowledge? And how do we drive people more to learn about how to build applications, find their inner calling, and monetize them?
Okay, so there's two easy ways to find me. On social media, if you're looking for me specifically, it's at TaraReed _ REED _. Also, I run a company called Apps Without Code, so we're at Apps Without Code on all social media platforms. And then lastly, if you're interested in learning more about monetizing, white labeling, and some of the no-code tools that are my favorite tools, if you didn't get a chance to talk about, I have a workshop that I'm doing next week. If you just go to workshop.appswithoutcode.com, and someone can type that in the chat for me, workshop.appswithoutcode.com, we can talk some more and go through all sorts of details about how to accomplish this for your idea.
Amazing. The one and only Tara Reed.
Thank you so much.
It was a pleasure.